Okay, this video is about me as an INFJ and an empath, clarifying and distinguishing the difference between empaths and narcissists, using MBTI and Jungian cognitive functions as a framework, a reliable framework. So, so the empaths are the intuitives that have empathy and that are not excluded from being empaths by being psychopaths, like the INTJs and the ENTJs. The INTJs and the ENTJs are born antisocial personality disorder, born psychopathic, overt narcissists. So they are not the empaths. But the other 6 intuitive types are the empaths. So that needs to be stated before I go any further. So it is the INFJ, the ENFJ, INFP, ENFP, INTP, and ENTP that are the empaths, the true empaths of the world. Empaths are kind of like the antithesis of narcissists in many ways, you know? But narcissists want to muddy those waters and blur the lines so we don't know the difference, or we think that empaths are just as bad as narcissists and narcissists are stealing the empath's good virtuous role or something, you know, by being more emotionally stable than her or whatever than that, you know? So even though all 6 of those types are intuitive empaths and they feel things very deeply and they have deep conscientiousness and, empathic strengths and stuff, the NT types of the intuitive empaths, the INTP and the ENTP, and the males of all the intuitive types. So all males that are INFJ, ENFJ, INFP, ENFP, INTP, ENTP, they are better at hiding the fact that they're an empath or whatever. And so they can be less obvious empaths in some ways. And so we, instead of saying borderline this early in this lecture, like say that they're like covert empaths, you know? So the intuitive empaths that are men or have masculine personality types like the T types, they're more covert about being empathic, you know? And so I want to tie that into the things that Sam Vaknin is saying. And so Sam Vaknin said something about, when he talks about how empathy, the reason why narcissists hate and abuse empaths is because they take the empathy as a narcissistic injury, as if the empath knows better than them what they should be doing for themselves, when they want to see themselves as being the ultimate authority, the ultimate all-knowing one who knows best for them. So they take it as an injury, and a narcissistic injury, when an empath wants to help them or give them advice or something. But the other thing that he said was that the narcissist sees the empath as like weak and vulnerable and even stupid, you know, because, being empathic, even though it can be like a superpower, those abilities, it can also be like a weakness, and it can bring a lot of weaknesses and vulnerabilities, And so the males of the intuitive empaths, they've got all those associations in their minds that identifying as an empath or identifying with being empathic makes them identify with weakness, with vulnerabilities and with even stupidity, And so the males of the intuitive empaths kind of disassociate themselves from fully identifying as empaths the way that the females fully identify as empaths, because they see that as identifying more with the empaths as a weakness, even though they are truly empaths inside, but they're more like covert empaths inside. Okay? And then, I use the word empath and borderline kind of interchangeably because it is only the empath types that turn borderline at their worst when they're unwell, and many of them are unwell, especially when they're surrounded by so many narcissists in our culture. So the intuitive empath men end up being covert empaths, and then at their worst, they end up being covert borderlines. Okay? And I don't like how the cluster B classification clumps borderlines in with narcissists and psychopaths, because, the overt borderline women are like empathic, and they don't want to be narcissists, and stuff like that. They're like the polar opposite of narcissists in many ways, so they want to be distinguished from narcissists, so they don't want to be clumped in with them. So I think that clumping empaths in with narcissists with the borderline distinction is one way of doing the role swapping and the muddying of the waters, making empaths look just as bad as narcissists and psychopaths, while psychopaths and narcissists covertly steal the empath's role. So, but I do want to say, like, the male intuitive empaths or the male intuitive borderlines, empaths at their worst, they do engage in a lot of narcissistic abuse, which is why maybe some people, it would actually be legitimate to clump them in with narcissists and psychopaths, because, and I'm not saying that the overt female women never engage in narcissistic abuse either. That's one reason that they idolize and end up in romantic relationships with like narcissists, overt borderline women, because of that. They're drawn to that inner vulnerability of the narcissist while they feel so vulnerable and weak, and so they're looking for like a protector or whatever. But so sometimes overt borderline women can idolize narcissists, or maybe mimic narcissists in some ways to like feel empowered in themselves, and not feel so weak anymore when they're used to feeling so weak as empaths, And so that's one way that, empaths can legitimately act out as narcissists and stuff, and that's why they might be clumped in with borderlines as with narcissists and psychopaths, and they get confused and stuff, but the confusion works to the benefit of the narcissist. So that's why I'm clarifying the confusion as an empath, and I think that true empaths should distinguish themselves. So back to the male intuitive empaths, they idolize narcissists even more than the female intuitive empath. The female intuitive empath idealizes the invulnerabilities of the narcissist, and so the male intuitive empath idealizes the invulnerabilities of the narcissist even more than the female does. And has to act it out more than the female does. And so he engages in a lot of narcissistic abuse with his romantic partners, that's what we see with intuitive empath men, making like romantic relationships impossible and stuff, and narcissistically abusing their romantic partners. It has a lot to do with even though they're empaths and can truly love and have a conscience and stuff, they feel like identifying with being an empath makes them weak, vulnerable, and stupid. And they need to uphold an image that they are not weak, vulnerable, or stupid, much more than the female intuitive empath or borderline needs to uphold some kind of image of strength. So the male intuitive empaths need to uphold an image of strength, and wisdom, or, intelligence in their minds. And one way they do that is by distancing themselves with their association and identification as an empath, even though they are empaths. And so that's one way it all gets blurred lines between empaths, narcissists, borderline, psychopaths, etc., And, and Sam Vaknin tries to say that empath is a bogus word that doesn't really mean anything, or, empaths don't exist or whatever, He said, like, highly sensitive people exist, yes, and that as a small minority population is what he said, and yes, that's true. And also the intuitive population is a minority population, and that overlaps with the highly sensitive population in many ways, and the intuitive empath personalities that I'm talking about. So empaths do exist, and every time he talks about borderlines, he's talking about an empath, because it's only those intuitive empathic types that become borderlines and then act out as psychopaths in a kind of role swapping process surrounded by narcissists, So while empaths, are, the polar opposite of narcissists, like empaths are like the embodiment of all the goodness in the world and stuff, and narcissists are the embodiment of all the badness in the world and the evil. Narcissists are invested in muddying those waters and blurring those lines, and even in some ways, with all the intuitive empaths that I met, it's like they're invested in that too with the narcissist. The intuitive empath men are blurring those lines too, because they don't want to be associated with the weakness and, and the opposite of intelligence that they see with the empath, So the intuitive empath men, they're covert empaths or covert borderlines, and they see the overt intuitive empath women, like the overt empaths and the overt borderlines, which are the most unwell of the overt empaths, and they see that, emotional intensity, emotional instability, and that comes along with being an overt empath or overt borderline, and they associate that with the weakness and stuff, and so then they try to not identify with that. And so they try to identify more with the narcissist that is like, nothing emotionally shakes me, I'm emotionally unshakable. They think that it's like an image of strength and intelligence for them, to be more like the narcissist that's emotionally unshakable. So this is how all the lines get blurred, and even intuitive empathic men aren't really making distinguishments and clarifying and distinguishing between themselves from narcissists, because they see how the overt empath does that, and they see it as a weakness or a vulnerability and not the most intelligent thing to do. And so they go for the opposite, which is the narcissist, which makes it seem like it's more intelligent and more strong, to be like the narcissist and not be like the empath. And so that's how the male intuitive empaths end up acting more like the narcissist and narcissistically abusing people. And so that's how, intuitive empaths can't even be distinguished from narcissists in so many ways. And that's why I'm making this video, to distinguish them. So I mentioned this in the ENTJ intersection video when I was contrasting NTJ Klaus with NTP Elijah and NTP Damon. But for anyone who is confused why I'm referring to NTPs, like INTP and ENTP, also as empaths when they're NT thinker types, in the superficial MBTI dichotomies, without getting it deeper into the Jungian cognitive functions for each type, we think of the NF, the intuitive feeler types, as the empaths, and the NT, the intuitive thinker types, as the rationals. And in a way, that dichotomy is true, but only superficially. And then when we look deeper into the Jungian cognitive functions, especially for the NTP types, they have FE, which is extroverted feeling, which is a humanitarian and empathic function. And this cognitive function actually makes the NTPs better empaths than the NFP types that have heavy FI, which is a very selfish cognitive function. So NTPs are actually better empaths than NFPs in many ways. And if you look at the profiles at typeinmind.com, typeinmind.com/TINE or NETI, those are the ENTP and INTP profiles. And there's also profiles for INTP and ENTP on practicaltyping.com. And these really give a lot of descriptive overviews of extroverted feeling and how it's really the true empathic function. So I think that INFJs, ENFJs, INTPs, and ENTPs are the most empathic because they have that FE, even though INFPs and ENFPs are still considered empaths as well. So I just want to clarify that before I go on continuing talking about how like NTP types, I'm not talking about NTJs. NTJs we're already covering and saying they're born as psychopathic overt narcissists, But NTPs are different than NTJs, and they're actually more empathic. And so that's why I'm including them in this list of empaths. And they are in the list of people that turn into borderlines when they're at their worst, because it's the empaths that turn into borderlines when they're at their worst.
Most of the men diagnosed with borderline personality disorder would be actually covert. And most of the women diagnosed with borderline personality disorder would be actually overt. A very similar situation exists nowadays with narcissistic personality disorder, where we could safely say that most of the classic overt narcissists are actually men, while most of the covert narcissists, and definitely inverted narcissists, codependent narcissists are actually women. Most of the men diagnosed with borderline personality disorder would be actually covert. In reality, by force of love and kindness. Drag her down. She's floating. She's like an air balloon, a helium balloon. Drag her down. Ground her, moor her in a good way. Tie her to your wrist. Keep her with you. She's worth it. She's worth it because most borderlines are beautiful, intelligent, heartbreakingly tender women. She's worth the investment and the effort if you're up to it. Being with a borderline is a prolonged fight on multiple fronts, every possible front, actually. Now, some intimate partners, some men, because I'm using the example of a woman with borderline, some men find it worthwhile because the borderlines have gifts to give, which very few women do. The typical borderline maintains her childlike pureness and goodness. A typical borderline, when she loves you, you would never ever experience a love like that in your life. It is total love. She is immersed in you. It's not like the codependent. Codependent depends on you. So in the codependent, there's a strong transactional element. The borderline loves you essentially unconditionally, like I would say a mother does. But she loves you as a woman, not as a mother. A borderline is typically a woman's woman because she's very, flirtatious, seductive, and so if you're into this kind of woman, I mean, she's a woman's woman. There's a lot, it's a treasure. Typical borderline woman is a treasure, but the price is very high and constant. And you need to be on your toes. You need to walk on eggshells all the time. Most men would say the price is not worth the price. I'm one of the few who probably will think in the future that the price is well worth the price. I have paid a very big personal price for my exclusive choice of borderline women. But whatever price I had received made all the prices I've paid well worth it. Not your cup of tea. Go away. Don't even start. Because you may get captivated and trapped. Avoid contact with borderline women. They are very, very alluring and addictive. If it's not your cup of tea, walk away. If you can't do all these things that I just mentioned on a regular, daily basis, hourly basis, just walk away. It's a full-time job. It's a full-time maintenance job. If you can, and you're up to it, a treasure awaits you at the end of the rainbow. Go for it, Dorothy. My name is Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and a professor of psychology in several universities. Today, I will try to explain to you why narcissists hate empathy and why they resent and reject and abuse and torture empathic people. But to do so, first I need to rid your mind of a lot of toxic misinformation and rank nonsense that you've been exposed to online. When a narcissist is looking for an intimate partner, they're looking for someone who can provide two of three S's. The three S's. SSS. Secondary narcissistic supply, sex, services, excellence, unmitigated brilliance. Memorize all this. And when the narcissist is deficient, when the narcissist supply is deficient, when he fails to secure flow of narcissistic supply, when he's unable, that's a job. Are you going to adulate and apply plus one? No. And I didn't mention empathy because narcissists, but you haven't really gone through the nothing in him hate empathy. And above all, they hate, detest, resent, reject, abuse, torture, humiliate, degrade, experience it. The warm glow of your empathy, your acceptance, and your love are wasted on him because he doesn't have the sensors and the detectors and the radar to pick them up. So narcissists don't care about empathy. But I would go even a step further. Empathy is a narcissistic injury. Narcissistic injury. Narcissists hate empathy. And above all, they hate, detest, resent, reject, abuse, torture, humiliate, degrade, despoil, and I have many other words, people with empathy. First of all, they consider empathy to be a weakness. If you're empathic, there are two possibilities. Either you're faking it, as a narcissist doesn't have empathy, and he thinks everyone is like him. So he doesn't have empathy, you don't have empathy. And if you're feigning, if you're empathic, you're feigning it, you're faking it. It's not real. You're acting. Or you're seriously stupid. You're foolish. You are weak. You're vulnerable. You're even maybe damaged or broken. You allow intruders into your emotional life. You experience by proxy and vicariously other people's pain, other people's needs. You're prone to manipulation. Your empathy renders you gullible. It renders you subservient, submissive. It's dangerous. Narcissists perceive empathy as a dangerous chink in the armor, a serious vulnerability which could be leveraged against you at any moment. Consider, for example, elements of empathy: advice, help, and support. When you're empathic, you want to help, you want to support your loved one, you want to give him advice, you want to prevent him from doing things which are self-defeating or self-destructive. You want to give him the succor and provide him with the safety net, the emotional safety net, which will help him to grow, help him to mature, help him to develop, and help him to realize his potential, to self-actualize. Empathy is about fostering and engendering growth in the person you love and empathize with. So it's a reflex to help someone. It's a reflex to provide support. It's a reflex to give advice. When you see someone in need, even a stranger, doesn't have to be a loved one. You see someone crying, you stoop and you ask, "Are you okay?" You know, you see someone stumbled in the street, you pick them up. You see someone wondering how to fulfill a form in a government office, you help them to fulfill the form. Advice, help, support. These are elements, crucial behavioral manifestations and emanations of empathy. And yet a narcissist regards them as narcissistic injury. Think about it for a minute. If you give him advice, it means that he needs advice. And he needs advice because there's something he hadn't considered, something he hadn't thought of, something he had missed. It means he is not omniscient. He is not all-knowing. It means he has a lot to learn, or something to learn. It means that you know more than he does. You have more experience than he had. You are superior. Giving advice is an act of hierarchy. It's hierarchical act. Where there's one superior person and one inferior person, the superior person gives advice to the inferior person. That's how the narcissist perceives the process of counseling, the process of providing advice. And so when you act in an advisory capacity, you are humiliating the narcissist. You're actually criticizing him. You're implying that he needs you. And need is weakness. Weakness is imperfection. The narcissist is godlike. He doesn't need anyone. He doesn't seek anyone. He obviously is not asking for anyone's help or advice. That's very presumptuous and arrogant of you to offer advice or help or to provide support. He doesn't need support. He supports everyone. He is omnipotent. He is all-powerful. He is godlike. How sacrilegious it is. How blasphemous. Blasphemous, nothing short of that. How heretical to suggest that he might need anything from you. He is the fount and the source of everything. He is the first cause, prima causa, and is the primum movens. He is also the first object. He is the world. And here you come and imply that he needs something, that he wants something, that he lacks something, that is deficient in some way, that you can set him right, that you can set him free, that you can better his life. That is narcissistic injury. It's humiliating. It infuriates him. You provoke narcissistic rage and all the defenses. He wants to eradicate you, to eliminate you, to demolish you, to destroy you, to reduce you to size, to put you back in your place where you belong. You know, your presumption, your arrogance, your haughtiness. He's going to teach you a lesson. He's going to show you. He's going to show you who's the boss. He's going to show you who knows everything. He's going to demonstrate to you how divine he is. These are the initial reactions to the most basic rudiments of empathy. Now imagine that you don't provide advice, no help, no support. Okay, you get the picture. You never volunteer, but you show interest in his life. You ask him questions such as, how are you? Is everything okay? How did it go in the meeting today? He has very dysfunctional attachment styles. I will dedicate a separate video to the narcissist attachment styles, not one. But at any rate, all these dysfunctional attachment styles lead to an impairment of intimacy, to disintimacy. The narcissist doesn't like intimacy because he associates intimacy with inevitable abandonment and hurt and pain. Got it. But there are even deeper reasons, which have to do with the narcissist's grandiosity. The narcissist does reject intimacy because of abandonment anxiety. He says to himself, if they see my true face, if I allow them too near me, too close to me, I'm going to be exposed as the fraud and imposter that I am. Or they're going to see how stringent and strident and harsh I am, or whatever, and they're going to see my true face, and they're going to just dump me and abandon me and walk away, or even cause me horrible pain by cheating on me or something. So there is a lot of abandonment anxiety, and avoiding intimacy is a way to forestall the abandonment and the pain attendant on the abandonment. But the presumption of intimacy, the attempt at intimacy by the empathic partner, provokes in the narcissist enormous reservoirs of aggression. He reacts with incredible violence to any hint, clue of ambient intimacy. And he rejects very cruelly and sadistically love and caring when offered to him. He sadistically frustrates his partner. He withholds, he rejects, he avoids, and of course, he actively abuses. Why is that? Because intimacy and love and care, but especially intimacy, challenge the foundations and the pillars of his grandiosity. The whole edifice comes crumbling down. Intimacy implies equality. You can't be intimate with someone who is superior to you. Intimacy means we're on the same plane. You know, you're intimate with me, I'm intimate with you. We're intimates. We're equal. It's a major narcissistic injury. When someone tries to be intimate with narcissist, he's actually saying to the narcissist, you're my equal. We can engage in this type of egalitarian interaction. And it's a serious injury to the narcissist because the narcissist assumes that he is always superior, above everyone, far from the madding crowd. Everyone is inferior to him. He is possessed of gifts and talents and skills and potentials that no one else has. So intimacy equals equality, bad. Intimacy equals commonness, commonality. Intimacy says, you're like everyone else. Everyone needs intimacy. Everyone craves for love. Everyone appreciates caring and acceptance and warmth. And you're like everyone. No, no. The worst sentence you can say to a narcissist is you're common, you're average, you're like everyone. This is again a serious narcissistic injury. Intimacy equal commonality, equal you are the same, like everyone, equals your average. Bad messages, wrong messages, grandiosity challenging messages. No, no. The narcissist is likely to try to get rid of you because you're propagating these messages. Intimacy also implies knowability. In other words, intimacy implies that your intimate partner can get to know you, can get to really, really grasp who you are, your essence, your quiddity. Intimacy implies that in some ways you can become one and the same. The extent of sharing in intimacy is such that you are beginning to identify big overlapping regions of personality, of traits, of interests, of perception of time, personal biography. Interpretation knows the narcissist, or in principle can get to know the narcissist. But narcissist is God. He is so removed from normal human affairs and from other people that there is no way on earth they can get to know him. Can you get to know God? Of course not. It's a being so different to you. You share so little in common, if anything. There's no way for you to know God. There's a way for you to obey God. There's a way for you to pray to God. There's a way for you to argue with God, even. There's a way for you to criticize or be very angry at God. There's a way for you to emotionally react to God. I mean, there are many, many ways to relate to God, but there's no way for you to truly know God, to grasp his essence, because you are not God and never will be. And you are not the narcissist and never will be. He is a being so evolved, so superior, so futuristic that you have nothing in common with him. And because you have nothing in common with him, you can never know him. And because you can never know him, you can never be truly intimate with him. And if you are claiming otherwise, you are humiliating him and you are narcissistically injuring him. And probably you're doing this on purpose because you want to hurt him and frustrate him and sadistically punish him. You're being punitive, you're being persecutory, you are being evil, you're being malicious and malevolent. And the narcissist becomes paranoid and aggressive and sometimes even violent. Why is all this? Why is all this? We have to regress a bit to fundamentals. Life, human biography, human personal history is a process of becoming. We are like raw material. Our genes predispose us within a repertory, within a spectrum, and then environment acts upon our genes. Environment plus genes help us to become. We are being formed as we go along. And we're never the same from one minute to another, which is why psychology can never be a science. And so life is a process of becoming. And the most crucial element in becoming is insight. Insight, INSIGHT. Insight into who you are, insight into other people and what makes them tick. A theory of mind. A theory of mind, what makes all of us human and what do we share via empathy. It's a theory of how other people's minds work, and then how your mind works in relation to these minds. A theory of the world. Insight is the way the aha moment where you suddenly deeply understand something, not here, but here, not in your head, but in your heart. Or, to be more precise, in your head and in your heart. Insight is the moment where everything falls into place, where everything makes sense, where you can see the future as clearly as you can see the present and the past, where suddenly everything interconnects, intermeshes, becomes one, a unity. So life is a process of becoming via insight, and it is insight that creates empathy. This empathy crucially depends on having insight into yourself, because who else is empathizing? If you don't know yourself, you cannot empathize. Someone has to do the empathizing. Empathy is a full-time job. It happens 60 seconds a minute, 60 minutes an hour, 24/7. If you have empathy, you can't turn it off. So, but empathy crucially depends on an I, on a self that empathizes. And such a self cannot constellate, cannot come together without a series of millions, I don't know, thousands, hundreds of thousands, no one measured, of insights, cumulative insights that gradually form into your identity, into who you are. Memories constitute a part of the insight, but emotions and cognitions as well. So then when you have an insight as to who you are, you have an insight as to who other people are. And that is called the theory of mind. And then insight is the bridge that connects you to other people. And when you have insight into other people, we call it empathy. So empathy is just another name for other directed insight. It's like at the beginning, the baby is focused on himself. He directs his life force, his libido, at himself. He is the locus of his libidinal investment. The baby is the world. Mother is part of the baby. Everything is part of the baby. The universe is part of the baby. The baby inflates like the Big Bang and incorporates the whole universe. So he needs a single insight into himself. But then the world fractures and breaks. The most traumatic event in everyone's life. It's when they realize that they have boundaries, that they stop somewhere and the world begins. That mother is not you. To hold on to this, we call it insight of learning. The foundation of conditioning has zero effect. You need to emote, not only to know. You need to know and emote in order to induce dynamics and change. To calibrate yourself, that you gain. Empathy is the crossing. Empathy is the reaching out, the extended hand in Michelangelo's painting, the hand of God. That is empathy. And it is only by comparing yourself to other people that you calibrate yourself, that you gain some realistic understanding about the world. Other people are your reality testing. They kind of focus you. They are the viewfinder. They tell you, listen, you're off. I mean, to the left a bit. You know, when you're trying to park your car, someone outside the car is telling you, go a bit to the left, go a bit to the right. These are social interactions. Why do we socialize? The main function of socializing is to become. Socializing helps us to become, helps us to crystallize, to coalesce, to cohere. We become cohesive while we socialize because other people serve as external rigid boundaries and they do not let us stray. They help us to see ourselves from the outside, and sometimes it's a very painful experience. In the case of narcissists, they undergo mortification. It's that bad. They disintegrate. But still, this information is crucial. Without this information, you'll be all over the place. You'll be all over the place, and you will never know, ever, when you're right or wrong. So, empathy, insight is empathy. Empathy is learning. Insight, empathy, comparison, socializing, learning. And so if you don't have empathy, you can never learn. You can never learn. And this is the narcissist problem. The narcissist has a truncated version of empathy, called empathy, which is only the reflexive and the cognitive element. He does not possess the emotional component of empathy, so he cannot empathize, so he cannot learn. Narcissist never learns. Again, we'll come to it a bit later. And the narcissist has another handicap, another disability. He has no access to his emotions. Nothing is possible, not an insight, not empathy, not learning, not comparison, not calibration, not socializing. Nothing is possible without some access, however restricted, to your emotions. All your emotions, positive and negative. If you have access, like the narcissist, only to negative emotions, what you obtain is cold empathy. And cold empathy is about subsuming other people, digesting them, taking over them. like body snatching them, making them, denying them, depriving them of their autonomy, rendering them extensions, snapshots, constructs, inertial, immobile objects. When you have only negative emotions, you want to suppress. Your instinct, your reflex is to suppress, to destroy, to subsume, to control. Those negative emotions are intolerable, they're unbearable. And you must eliminate whoever is causing you these negative emotions, the source of the frustration. You must make them like you. There can be no light between you and them. But if everyone is like you, if everyone is cloned, if everyone is a copy of you, there's no growth and no learning. Who will you learn from? How can you grow? Growth and learning are conditioned on positive and negative emotions working together, helping you survive in an environment which is partly human, with humans, and partly natural, helping you to interact in meaningful ways, helping you to exercise your empathy without too much risk, helping you to grow. And so narcissist doesn't have this. He doesn't have empathy. And he has no access to his positive emotions. He's utterly disabled. He's quadriplegic. He has both his legs, a gun. Both legs of this basic interaction, a gun. And so he never learns. Where emotions are inaccessible, narcissists attempt to grasp other people and themselves analytically, through the brain, intellectually. They try to abstract other people, to make them up into abstractions. They try to generalize other people, to make them into categories or classes. They try to come up with rules, 12, 5, 7, never mind how many. They try to impose order on the world. They try to construct models, theories. They try desperately, they scramble, they flail in an attempt to introduce order instead of chaos into a world that they cannot decipher, that they cannot comprehend, because they don't have the basic tools: empathy and positivity, emotional positivity. So they're like blind people trying to survive in the environment, and what they're trying to do, they're trying to listen with their mind, and trying to extrapolate, interpolate, analyze, synthesize, formulate. I mean, all the tools that we commonly use in mathematics or physics or computer science, but never in human interaction. These are the only tools available to the narcissist. But such knowledge gained via the mind analytically is like cramming for an exam. It's a kind of knowledge that is not assimilated, not integrated, not part of you. When you cram for an exam, you cram and then you puke the knowledge on paper. And having puked it, it's gone. It's no longer in your system. This is knowledge that is vomited knowledge, not real, has no effect except sometimes to poison you. And because the narcissist is incapable of true learning, assimilating and integrating raw information into knowledge structures, converting information into knowledge, converting knowledge into insight, converting insight into wisdom, converting wisdom into lessons, converting lessons into avoidance of bad situations in the future. Because narcissists are incapable of learning, they are doomed to repeat things. He who doesn't know history is doomed to repeat it. They are doomed to compulsive repetition. Freud called it repetition compulsion. They are doomed to keep doing the same things again and again, like some demented or deranged person, like some crazy being or some badly programmed machine in a loop. They loop all the time. The same lessons. The narcissist rediscovers the same lessons with every mortification, with every injury. Empathy via insight. It guarantees learning. It generates growth. narcissists don't have positive emotions. Oh, they have, but they are afraid to access the positive emotions. Narcissists reject help and reject advice partly because of this. They know that they cannot be helped. They know that they are incorrigible. They know that they are refractory. They know that they are hopeless, simply. Narcissism is a hopeless condition. It's terminal cancer of the soul. So narcissists know that. Narcissists are self-aware. Ignore the nonsense online. They know this. Of course, immediately they reframe this knowledge and they say, well, the fact that I'm like that makes me superior. The next stage in evolution, etc., etc. Of course, they defend themselves. They defend themselves against the pain of this realization, against the utter despair, against the chaos. It's a protective mechanism, reframing, creating new narratives. But they reject help and advice because they don't believe in the efficacy of any help proffered and any advice given. Why waste time? Why listen to someone's advice if I can't implement it? Or if I implement it once, but in a year's time I'll forget why I had implemented it. If I'm so dissociative that all my hard disk is wiped clean once a year, why would I bother to save files? Imagine that you have a hard disk that self-erases, self-wipes every year. Would you bother to save files on that hard disk? No. The same with the narcissist. Why would he bother with advice, with help, with strategies, with coping, with therapy even? Why would he bother with himself if there's no self, no emotions, no empathy, no ability to interact meaningfully with other people? Nothing there. Nothing there. Just an enormous emptiness and void and deep space and howling winds in a hall of mirrors. Why would he bother with that? Narcissist, the first person the narcissist gives up on is himself. Narcissism is not a disease or a disorder of presence. It's a disorder of absence. The narcissist absented himself from his self. Narcissist is gone, having left behind his skeleton, the shell, an empty home, empty house, not a home. Narcissist discourages intimacy, also for these reasons, you know. And he finds displays of emotions fake and embarrassing because he has no emotions. And he can't countenance, can't imagine. He can't imagine because imagination has very little to do with intellect or analytical skills. That's why many narcissists have high IQs, 190 for example, but they are total retards and idiots. They have zero wisdom and 190 IQ. Believe me, from personal experience. So they regard emotions as fake and embarrassing because anything they hadn't experienced doesn't exist. It is the narcissist who is the yardstick and benchmark of creation. Everything emanates from him. He is the fount of everything. So if something is alien to him, strange, never experienced before, it probably does not exist. And anyone who claims otherwise is a con artist. It's a fake. And it's embarrassing to watch this. Does the other person really think the narcissist is an idiot? His intimate partner, does she think the narcissist is deceived and manipulated by her displays of alleged ostensible love? Narcissist knows there's no such thing as love. He knows she's faking it. He knows she wants something. She's about to ask for something. He knows it's goal-oriented. And so this is why I find the whole movement of empaths online to be risible, ridiculous. Empath, super empath, and now supernova empath. These are self-aggrandizing labels used by covert narcissists online as they perpetuate and leverage their newfound eternal professional victim status. And they do this to garner attention, and some of them to make money. Simple. Not nice, but simple. There's no such thing as empath. First of all, because there's no such thing as empath. There's highly sensitive persons, but it's not the same as empath. And it's a tiny minority of the population. But there's no such thing as empath because narcissists do not select for empathy. They don't understand empathy. They resent empathy. They are disgusted by empathy. They reject empathy as a challenge to their grandiosity, and they consider empathy to be fake. So if they don't select for empathy, not all the victims of narcissists would have been empaths. Majority of sources of supply of the narcissists are not especially empathic, or even not empathic at all. For example, narcissists very frequently have psychopaths as intimate partners, borderlines as intimate partners. These people have deficient empathy. The borderlines have functional empathy. Psychopaths have no empathy whatsoever, cold empathy. So, and if you want to prove to yourself my point, and if you want to do it conclusively, here's my advice. Join the cesspits that pass for empath support forums. Dare to suggest that someone there is not really an empath, not too empathic, or dare to raise the possibility that she may have had a role to play in the relationship, in the dysfunctional relationship. Maybe her mate selection was flawed. Maybe it served some purpose for her to be a victim. Dare to suggest this. You will instantly become the recipient of every form of abuse and malevolence known to men or women. Empaths are far more vicious, snipingly malevolent, and egregious than anything I have ever seen, witnessed in 25 years, offered by narcissists. The abuse you will experience in the cesspools and cesspits of empath support forums is far worse than anything you have endured from your narcissist. It is crystallized, unadulterated narcissistic abuse. Nothing worse than the narcissistic rage or the passive aggression of covert empaths. What about friendship? Pain and how your agony feed into the narcissist's deepest needs to regulate his moods, his emotions, and to feel good, to restore homeostasis, equilibrium, and inner peace. And we start, of course, with Bessel van der Kolk and his masterpiece, The Body Keeps the Score. Bessel van der Kolk is arguably the number one trauma expert in the world today. In this excellent introduction to trauma, he dwells upon a concept called the inescapable shock. The inescapable shock is a physical condition in which the organism cannot do anything to affect the inevitable, hurt or pain. So there you are, and you see it coming, and you know you're going to be writhing in pain. You know you're going to be in agony. You know you're going to be traumatized. You know bad things are going to happen to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Van der Kolk writes, confrontation with the reality that there is nothing one can do to stave off the inevitable leads to learned helplessness, a phenomenon that is critical for understanding and treating traumatized and humiliated human beings. After all, says Van der Kolk, the agony of the dogs in their cages, I will explain a bit later, may not have been so different from children who are put down by their parents or teachers and have nowhere to go, or women who are trapped in violent intimate relationships, struggling with two opposing impulses, one to maintain a loving relationship, the other to escape their pain, hurt, and betrayal. Now, the dogs that Van der Kolk mentions in this passage were dogs owned by Pavlov. Pavlov was a Russian neurologist and proto-psychologist, and he experimented on dogs, and experiments which today would be frowned upon, trust me. He experimented on dogs, and one day he went home, and the river Neva overflowed and flooded the basements where the dogs were, and they were almost frozen to death, and they almost drowned, and so they were traumatized. Van der Kolk refers to these dogs, and he says they're not different to children who are traumatized, or to women who are traumatized in intimate relationships. Van der Kolk continues. Pavlov described one other reaction, which he called the ultra-paradoxical stage, in which animals showed positive responses to negative stimuli, like loud songs or starvation. And Van der Kolk says, it reminds me of war correspondents who suffer from having witnessed friends' deaths, but who cannot wait to go back to a combat zone, because it's the only thing that makes them feel alive. The observations about his dog's reactions to the flow led Pavlov to the last major study of his life on the reflex of purpose, which he called the most important factor of life. All creatures, said Pavlov, need a purpose. They need to organize themselves to make their way in the world, like preparing a shelter for the coming winter, arranging for a mate, building a nest or home, and learning skills to make a living. One of the most devastating effects of trauma is that it often damages the reflex of purpose. Now remember all these things, because the narcissism is a post-traumatic condition. The narcissist had been traumatized as a child. We dwelt upon it. I dwelt upon it in numerous previous videos. Please go and watch them. There are many forms of abuse. Pampering and spoiling and idolizing the child is abuse. So children are abused all the time. Some children, probably with a genetic predisposition, become narcissists. So narcissists, by definition, are abused, post-traumatized children. They freeze. They have arrested development. They remain children for the rest of their lives, and they are traumatized children. Now, the only way that the narcissist can alleviate and ameliorate his trauma is by traumatizing you. The narcissist develops a dysfunctional way of coping with his inner pain. He uses your shock. He creates an inescapable shock for you. He uses your inescapable shock as his healing. When he puts you in an inescapable shock, he is in control, of course. He assumes the position of the abuser. He identifies the abuser. In a way, he becomes the abuser. At that moment, he had lost his learned helplessness. He is no longer helpless. If you are in control of someone, you're no longer helpless, even if it's one person. And so, by causing you pain, by agonizing and torturing you, the narcissist reasserts control, regains a sense of mastery over his life, in a way, transitions from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control. And it's healing. It's a feeling of becoming whole. It's suddenly the world makes sense. Suddenly you can navigate. Suddenly you can make decisions which have outcomes in the real world. And so your inescapable shock, your trauma, are proof to the narcissist that he is out of his own trauma. In a way, the narcissist shifts his trauma to you, hands you his trauma. He wants you to own his trauma. He wants you to become the agent of his trauma. So by giving you his trauma, he gets rid of it, of course. And the minute he gets rid of it, he is whole, he is complete, he is cured, he is healed, and he regains a sense of purpose. And this is why very often you can see narcissists elated, happy, manic even, in the wake of a fight or a conflict, or a breakup in a relationship. You would expect them to be heartbroken. You would expect them to be, devastated. You would expect them to cry and to moan. No way. They just lost the love of their life, and they are the happiest people on earth. And they're the happiest people on earth because this very trauma, the mortification, allows them to get in touch with themselves and not to be afraid of it. The mortification, the narcissistic injury, the extreme injury, allows them to experience emotions and moods and not be afraid of this experience, but because it is not going to get out of hand. They are not going to lose control. And why they're not going to lose control? Because they control you. It's controlled by proxy. They render you, they make you into an emblem, into a symbol of the restoration of their internal control. It's like, because you remember, the narcissist doesn't have anything inside. There's no ego, there's no self, constellated self, there's nothing there. It's a vast emptiness. Everything that happens to the narcissist happens from the outside. When the narcissist wants feedback to regulate his sense of self-worth, he goes outside, not inside. He asks people to give him narcissistic supply. Similarly, when the narcissist wants to regulate his sense of self-control, when he wants to feel safe, secure, accepted, loved, not traumatized, when he wants to render the world predictable, controllable, friendly, not hostile, he needs you to give him this gift. And the only way you can give him these gifts, the only way you can calm him down, the only way you can restore him is by destroying yourself. Your devastation, your ruination, your annihilation is his restoration, his flourishing, his elation, his ego syntony. This is at the core of nihilism. Nihilism is deriving positive emotionality from negative shocks, external shocks. And so someone made a comment that many narcissists seem actually to flourish and be happy during this pandemic. Very true. The pandemic is a form of external shock, and this external shock renders numerous people miserable. Somehow the narcissist appropriates this shock, and the misery feeds him. Again, it's less like a sadist and more like a vampire. The narcissist is not a sadist in the sense that if he cuts you open, he's gonna be aroused sexually. That's sadism. Or if he's really, really evil, that's going to gratify him. He doesn't derive, most narcissists, the vast majority of narcissists, don't derive pleasure from inflicting pain, which is the primary condition for diagnosing sadism. But they need your pain. They need your devastation. They need you to be down. They need you to be under. They need you to be dead. They need to mummify you. They need you to be the dead mother. Because the dead mother, above everything else, is dead. The ultimate punishment. They need to kill you in order to revive, which is a very good definition of vampirism. They need your blood. And the resurrection of the narcissist crucially depends on your crucifixion. I'll quote from another book, Awkward, by Tai Tashiro. It was a guy called John Gottman. He and his colleagues made seminal studies in the University of Washington. And they discovered that people keep a mental ledger, a mental trying to balance the mental ledger would also be negative. And this, of course, this is delusional. To judge the world through a filter, any filter, the filter of negativity, for example, that's a delusional disorder. Delusional disorder means that we have an impaired reality testing. We don't see what's really happening. But we take in the information and then we filter it. Some of it we eliminate, and this is called confirmation bias. So some of it we eliminate, and some of it we reinterpret. This is called reframing. And most of it we just arbitrarily assign to one column of the ledger. So I gave an extreme example in the video about empathy, where you tell the narcissist, do you need help? You tell the narcissist, do you need help? The narcissist would regard this as a negative comment. Because what do you mean, do you need help? If you say to the narcissist, do you need help? It means that he is helpless. It means that he's inferior. It means that he's deficient and weak and doesn't know what to do. It means that he needs you. It means that you're superior to him. It's all negative. So the narcissist would tend to imbue everything, to paint everything with a negative brush, and that creates a delusional disorder. But the narcissist has two peculiarities. All his delusions are self-centered. Even when he interacts with you interpersonally, he is not interacting with you. He's interacting with your representation. You remember the snapshotting process? He's interacting with your representation. Even when he idealizes you so that he can idealize himself. There's no idealization in narcissism. There is only co-idealization. If the narcissist idealizes you and considers you to be the most beautiful, drop-dead gorgeous, brilliant woman on earth, that makes him irresistible. It makes him a genius, because a woman like that would only be with an irresistible genius. So even when the narcissist idealizes you, he co-idealizes. It's about him. It has to do with him. It's not about you. You're nothing. You're a peg. You're an excuse. You're a trigger. You are an abstract. You're a symbol. You're an emblem. You're a representation. You're an avatar. Enough? You're nobody. That's why you're so easily interchangeable. And so the narcissist delusional disorder is exclusively self-centered, while most delusional disorders are not. And the second thing is the narcissist is self-aware. Get rid of the nonsense, the online propagated nonsense, that narcissists are not self-aware. They're fully self-aware. But they attribute the discrepancies that inevitably and invariably arise not to an impaired reality testing, but to the inferiority, malice, envy of other people. So the narcissist would notice, for example, that women constantly break up with him, women constantly cheat on him, women constantly betray him. So he has two options, because there's something wrong with me. And he says it actually. He says, I'm different. He's not saying something is wrong. Wrong or right, these are value judgments. Some people agree that it's wrong, some people say it's right. So wrong and right are not clinical psychological terms, but different is. And the narcissist says, I'm different. I am not normal, thank God. I'm not common, I'm not average, I'm not typical. I'm unique, I'm idiosyncratic. I'm unprecedented, I'm unparalleled. He knows he's different. And he realizes that his differentness, he realizes that his freakishness, in a way, generates in other people behaviors that they usually, that are atypical. People don't behave this way, except with him. And so he has to explain this to himself above all. And he says, well, people do this to me because they are malicious, they're dumb, they're envious, and so on. So that he externalizes, he has alloplastic defenses. He externalizes the locus of control. He says, it's their fault. I am different, but their reactions to my differentness, their reactions are dysfunctional. Their reactions are sick and envious and malicious. They're the psychopaths. They're the narcissists. The narcissist uses devaluation, therefore, to bridge the gap between perception and reality, which leads us to the critical, central concept of this video, which is the grandiosity gap. Anytime there's a gap between self-perception, self-image, self-appraisal, self-evaluation, and reality, drab, shabby, routine reality. Anytime there's an abyss, a chasm opening between these two, the narcissist experiences something called the grandiosity gap. It's like a gap, exactly. It's like it would be staring down into the abyss, and very often the abyss staring back at you. The narcissist is emotionless, not in the sense that he doesn't have emotions, but in the sense that he has access only to his negative emotions. So he has no access to emotional positivity, and he doesn't do well positive emotions. He fakes positive emotions, or he gets it wrong. It's awry. It's creepy. It's off key. It's awkward. So narcissist is emotionless, And he's also not interested in people because he considers himself the next step in evolution. He considers himself so vastly superior to people. I mean, narcissists can say, the difference between me and an average person is bigger than the difference between an average person and a chimpanzee in IQ terms. That's a typical narcissistic sentence. So why would you be interested in a chimpanzee? People, narcissists are not interested in people. They find them boring, dull, repetitive, stupid, etc., etc. And also, narcissists don't have positive emotions. And so, narcissists are dull and excruciatingly boring because they are focused on themselves and on their interminable monologues. They may be entertaining for an hour or two, but narcissists are one-trick ponies. They are, after a while, they become old. Narcissists are internally dead. The clinical term in psychoanalysis is destrudo. There's libido, which comes from eros, which is the power of life. And libido includes the sexual component, of course. Sex is a manifestation of life and leads to life, new life. So libido. And the opposite of libido is the destrudo. And destrudo comes from thanatos, which is the force of death, force of life, eros, force of death, thanatos, libido, and destrudo. Narcissus is internally dead. He's the walking dead. And yet he's convinced that he's awe-inspiring and that he's fascinating and so on. That's another form of self-centered delusion. So to summarize, the narcissist is a delusional disorder. And he has a delusional disorder that is unique, really unique, in the sense that it's very self-centered. And his self-awareness doesn't lead to insight. It leads to reframing the environment, reframing the narrative so that he is never guilty, he is never to blame, he's never responsible. And then he puts it on you. And he puts it on you. He puts it on you by doing two things. He monitors closely everything you do and everything you say, and he misinterprets most of it as negative. He holds it against you in a way. He has a ledger that is against you ledger. And he balances this by behaving negatively with you. And why does he need to do that? Why does he need to misinterpret and reframe everything you do and everything you say in negative terms? Because he needs to torture you. He needs to hurt you. He needs to cause you pain. He needs to destroy you. He needs to devastate you. He needs to disappoint you. Why does he need to do that? Because he needs to externalize his trauma. He needs you to take his trauma away from him. He needs you to own his trauma. He needs to move the locus of his trauma from his empty self to you. And when he does this, he feels whole. He feels in control. He feels in touch with himself. He may even feel positive emotionality like joy or happiness. And so this is the sequence. He needs his delusions to consider you as a negative entity. He needs to consider you as a negative entity to justify his torture and abuse of you. And he needs to torture and abuse you so that you can experience his trauma, so that you can take his trauma away from him, and so that he can control you, so that he feels that he is again in control. By becoming the abuser, the narcissist is rewriting history, rewriting the early conflict, the early childhood conflict. And this time, he comes on top. With his dead mother, he was a plaything, he was a nothing, he was an object. With his dead mother, he was hurt, he was traumatized, he was ruined, he was destroyed, he was the victim with his dead mother. He needs to victimize you in order to become his dead mother, because his dead mother had the upper hand, and he needs to have the upper hand in order to heal. And so this is at the core of cold therapy, by the way. We re-traumatize the narcissist so that he can experience the trauma again, and this time emerge on top without resorting to conveying the trauma, without resorting to traumatizing someone else, Narcissist's traumatic experience is contagious, is infectious. He infects you like a virus. So we need to isolate him. We need to isolate him so that he can spew out the viruses and they will infect no one. But then he will see that nothing happens. He survives. He's alive. As things stand, if there's only you and him, the narcissist will infect you with his trauma. And he needs to infect you with his trauma because this way he had externalized his viruses. He had given you his viruses. And his body, his mind, they're clean and clear. And so all this has to do with what I mentioned, the grandiosity gap. Now, narcissists, consequently, as a result of all this, narcissists are hateful, they're aggressive, they're destructive, they're hurtful to both self and to others, even to significant others. I usually call them insignificant others. But the narcissist cannot admit it. You cannot say, you know what, let me think about, yeah, I'm bloody hell, I'm a horrible person, I'm hateful, I'm aggressive. You know, realizing these things, realizing these behaviors and these qualities in him, they would lead to severe ego dystony, severe discombobulation, severe inner conflict and inner dissonance. No one can survive this, not even the narcissist. So what the narcissist does, he projects these qualities. He projects them onto other people. He projects his hate, projects his aggression, obnoxiousness, vileness, destructiveness. He projects them onto you. But projecting these qualities onto you is not so easy. Because you know what? You're a nice person. You're empathic, you're loving, you're caring. Every time you love the narcissist, every time you care for the narcissist, you're undermining his ability to project onto you. Your love, your acceptance, your empathy are perceived as sabotage, obstruction. The narcissist needs to project the negative part in him onto you. He needs to believe that you are the hateful one, the deceitful one, the destructive one. You are the monster. You are the monster. You're the enemy. You're the dragon. He needs to believe that, honestly, sincerely, because he can't live. He can't survive with the realization that the monster is him, that he is the Frankenstein, that he is the zombie. He can't digest it. He can't accept it. He needs to move this realization onto you. He needs to see you this way. But you're not letting him. You're undermining. You're sabotaging. You're preventing him from doing this by being nice, by being kind, by being helpful, by being empathic, by giving him advice. He hates your guts for this. You don't let him do his thing. You don't let him project onto you. You refuse to behave like the monster that you should be. He is dimly aware of his projection because you make it very difficult for him to really see you as an evil person. So then he does something. He uses a defense mechanism called projective identification. Projective identification is when he forces you, absolutely forces you to behave like a monster. He tortures you, he provokes you, he evokes in you trauma, he undermines you, he constricts you, he limits you, he fights with you, he does everything in his power to convert you from an empathic, loving person into a vile, evil, super aggressive, defiant, psychopathic, hateful abuser. And the projective identification, if it's successful, makes you this way. You develop a narcissistic and psychopathic overlay. You become a narcissist or a psychopath for a while. And this makes the narcissist happy. You see, he says, I told you so. Didn't I tell you she was a psychopath? Didn't I tell you she was a narcissist? Was that not expected? Didn't I predict this? It's not my fault. You say I'm okay. She's the one. She's the one. And she pulled the wool over your eyes. She deceived all of you. All of you fell in her trap, in her narrative. I'm the victim. I am the victim, says the.
So for the Sam Vaknin clips, I didn't put in his whole lectures. I just put in clips and excerpts of like the ones that I thought were most profound and stuff. So yeah, a lot of the stuff is prophetic and profound, and then a lot of it is like bullshit. But then I was really relieved that what I thought was bullshit, like he basically exposed that it's his bullshit, with his further explanation. So I started with a clip where he says like borderlines are his favorite, choice of romantic partners and stuff, because they're so beautiful and childlike and innocent and all this other stuff. They have all these beautiful qualities and whatever, And he says like there's a big price to be with them, but it's well worth it and blah blah blah. The only reason there's a big price to pay with them is because he's constantly grieving them on purpose to regulate his own sick emotional, whatever, his narcissistic impulses or whatever. But he has to project badness on her, and all the borderlines and act like, oh, they're such problem partners, but I deal with it, because there's good sides of them too, or whatever. So, he's projecting badness on borderlines, while also, idealizing them and claiming them as his preferred partners. The reason they're his preferred partners, whether he knows it or not, is because they project goodness on him while he projects badness on them, and they do a role swapping process. Just like I said in the ENTJ intersection video with ENTJ Klaus Michelson. So I believe what he says, that borderlines are his favorite choice of partners, and the borderlines are the empaths, and the empaths are the intuitives that have empathy that are not psychopaths, that are not precluded from being psychopaths. So the empaths are the INFJs, the ENFJs, the INFPs, the ENFPs, the INTPs, and the INTPs. The intuitives that have not been precluded from being empaths by being psychopaths, which are the INTJs and the ENTJs. And so it's the empaths that turn into the borderlines if they're unwell. And if an empath is around a psychopath or an overt narcissist, they will be unwell, because that's what the overt narcissist wants, which he admits, which is very good. It's very useful that he admits all of that. So yeah, so empaths and borderlines are interchangeable, and I just listed the types that are empaths and that turn into borderlines when they're unwell. And your pain is the narcissist's food, deny him or her. So he's talking about how he loves to, upset people, especially borderlines or whatever, people that will have, or empaths, people that will have like big reactions and stuff, and do a projection process with him. And so he's saying that he needs to upset you to feel control and regulate himself and stuff, and that it's kind of like a vampire, the way he needs to feed on you and stuff. And so what he's saying that's wrong is that, that narcissists are born from trauma. He is already projecting badness on his mother when he says like a dead mother made him a narcissist. And he explains further, if you make it through all of his explanations, he explains like that the narcissist needs to constantly project his badness on everyone else. And so that includes the dead mother that he mentioned when he talks about, being traumatized. And, he says like, oh, maybe there's a genetic predisposition to narcissism. And then, it's like activated by bad parenting or whatever. But no, it's actually that it was all genetically inherited, and it didn't matter what the parenting was, and that he's just using the damaged stories from bad parenting, just like I said, Klaus Michelson was using his damaged stories, And I believe that from, like I said, giving birth to an INTJ child with a guy like INTJ Sam Vaknin, and realizing that they're born like this, and at only 7 years old, between 7 to 10 years old, they start projecting badness on their parents and saying that their parents did something wrong to them, and that's all part of them projecting badness. They're already starting to do that before they even hit double digits in age. So everything he says about, being narcissists being traumatized individuals that got traumatized by bad mothers or whatever, No, narcissists like him, INTJs and ENTJs, were born over narcissists. And they were already in childhood between the ages of 7 and 10 years old, projecting badness on their parents and acting like their parents did something bad to them to make them narcissists or whatever. But really, they were born that way. And I know that before I had my own INTJ daughter and watched her come to double digits in age, you know, after she inherited her father's overt narcissistic personality disorder and his antisocial personality disorder, like, before I raised her to double digits in age and before I learned about projection process between empaths and narcissists, you know, projecting the bad on the good and the good on the bad, I believed the things that he was saying about, I believe the things that Dr. Sam Beckman was saying about, you know, it's bad mothers, unnurturing mothers that create narcissists. That kind of narrative feeds into the big heart of the borderline that wants to fix things with maternal nurturing. So I think that's another reason why Sam Vaknin uses that narrative, because again, it gets the empaths or the unwell empaths, the borderlines, to want to fix them with their maternal sense or whatever, or want to be like a better mother or whatever to them, when really it wasn't bad mothering at all that ever made them into narcissists. They were born that way. And so they just milk these damage stories to get empaths to pour some maternal investment into them when it's not true. But I don't think I have to convince you that it's not that true too much, because he pretty much makes it seem not true when he goes further on to explain how, you know, the narcissist like him always has to project badness on everyone else and make everyone else the monster. And so he doesn't think that he's the defective one, you know. And so that starts all the way from the time they're like 7, 8, 9 years old. These born NTJ narcissists, you know, they start projecting badness on everyone. And I think INTJ Wednesday Adams, I play that clip in some of my INTJ videos where she's projecting badness on her mother. Like, she's just a child, you know, and her mother is nurturing her and being supportive of her. But she's like saying, I'm not you, mother. I'll never love. I'll never have kids. And her mom's like, you know, I've heard girls like you say hurtful things. I won't take it to heart. And then Wednesday's like, you don't have a heart. And she's projecting her own badness on her own mother. And that is like a very realistic NTJ child thing to do. Like, they're lacking empathy, they're lacking conscience, they're overt narcissists addicted to narcissistic supply, and were born that way because of their cognitive function stack order of preferences. You know, they can't help it, they were born that way. And so, like Sam Vaknin explains, they only have this kind of negative filter view of the world, negative emotionality, and they're always projecting badness on everyone else, especially anyone who's trying to say they're bad, you know. And so they're already projecting badness on their parents and saying they have damage stories before they're even hitting double digits in age. And I know that from raising an INTJ child. So I believe that, like I said, to reiterate, that him saying that narcissists are traumatized individuals and milking damage stories of bad parenting, yes, there are tons of bad mothers in the world. Probably most mothers are bad mothers in the world, when every 1 in 4 women could be an SFJ covert narcissist, you know, prone to covert narcissism. Yes, bad parenting is definitely happening, you know, and a super empathic maternal type, like an intuitive empath, is going to want to fix all that wrong maternal nurturing. But the wrong maternal nurturing wasn't really what created it. It was actually more genes and nature than nurture that created it. And they're just using those damage stories to get empaths to pour nurturing into them and try to fix their trauma. Like they said, him saying that he's a traumatized individual means that someone who's interested in fixing trauma needs to fix it. That's going to be the empaths, you know. And so he wants the empaths to pour their investment in them so that they can do a role swapping process, so he can keep projecting badness on the most good, and the most good can keep projecting goodness on the bad, you know. And so him saying that bad mothering caused his trauma helps him to feed on more borderline big hearts that want to fix things with better maternal sense than his mother had, you know. And then I love the video, Your Empathy as Narcissistic Injury, Narcissists Never Learn. So he talks about, like, you know, he talks about why narcissists hate empaths, you know. as much as they want to be around them and stuff so that they can do the role swapping process and steal their role, you know, and project their badness on them and make them devils or whatever, like they hate empaths too, and they hate empathy and stuff. And he explains how they take it as a narcissistic injury. Like if you think that you can help them or fix them or save them or give them insight that they didn't have, they take that as an insult because they feel like they have godlike knowledge and insight on everything, you know, and there's nothing that you should be able to teach them. And that, you know, advice is hierarchical, and if they need advice from someone, if someone has advice to give them, then that makes them inferior, you know, and they can't see themselves as anything but superior to everyone, you know. So anyone, you know, empaths want to help everyone and fix everyone and everything, give everyone advice and everything. And he's saying like narcissists take that as an insult, you know, and then they want to punish you for it. So I think that's very realistic and good insight. And then I like what he also says too about how they only have the cold cognitive empathy, which is like subsuming people like body snatchers and stuff, but they don't have the affective empathy that helps them like really calibrate themselves to other people and get insight and really learn, you know. And so in a way they like don't learn very well, you know. They don't get transformative insights from experiences because it's like their hard drive gets wiped, you know, because they don't have the emotional resonance from anything that they learn. So another thing I want to talk about, if I didn't make it clear yet already, is that Sam Vaknin is projecting his badness on empaths, which he doesn't even realize that empaths and borderlines is pretty interchangeable. That empaths are the ones that become borderlines. So, you know, he says that borderlines are his preferred choice and partner and that they're intelligent and innocent and beautiful and blah, 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 you know. But he doesn't really realize that those are the empaths when he goes on to say, like, empaths is like a bogus word. It's like a word for covert narcissists to milk emotional, you know, manipulation or whatever, you know. And so that's where he's wrong. The covert narcissists and the empaths are completely different people. And the MBTI framework helps us discern which ones are the empaths and which ones are the covert narcissists. So the empaths are the intuitives that have empathy. The intuitives that are not excluded from being empaths by being psychopaths, like the INTJs, and the ENTJs are excluded from being the intuitive empaths because they're psychopaths. But the empaths are the intuitives that do have empathy, which are the other 6 types. The INFJ, the ENFJ, the INFP, the ENFP, the INTP, and the ENTP. And so those are the types he's talking about when he's talking about like borderlines being super intelligent and, you know, innocent and stuff like that, and special and worth, you know, whatever trouble they give him that he provoked them to give him, you know. And so he's wrong when he says that the word empath is just is just something that, you know, covert narcissists use to emotionally manipulate or whatever. Like, covert narcissists do that. Covert narcissists mimic empaths, like I've said in my other videos about Lori Vallow and ESFJ Lori Vallow, ISFJ Chad Daybell, ISFJ Jelly Roll, ESFJ Bunny. I say they mimic empaths, you know, because they're the most good. The empaths are the most good, you know, while the narcissists are the most bad. And so they have to do a role swapping process of projection with them, projecting the bad on the good and projecting the good on the bad. And so on one hand, he's saying that, you know, borderlines are so great, you know, they're so intelligent, they're so innocent and stuff. And that's when he's talking about the intuitive people that aren't INTJs and ENTJ psychopaths, you know. But then he turns around and projects badness on the borderlines. He's like, and empaths and stuff, and saying like, oh, they're vicious, you know, more vicious than in anything you'll get from a narcissist, you know. And it's because they're more emotionally driven or whatever, you know. So the empath can be more dangerous than the psychopath because their wrath is driven from a more emotional place, and more pain, you know, that the psychopath doesn't feel. The psychopath doesn't feel driven to extreme ends because he doesn't feel the pains that the empath feels. And so that's why sometimes empaths can be more dangerous, like Jigsaw or whatever, like INFJ Jigsaw. So he projects badness on borderlines, and then he confuses them with covert narcissists, just like so many people confuse covert narcissists and overt borderline women or whatever, So he's saying that the so-called empaths are just covert narcissists. No, there are actually real empaths, and they're the intuitives that are not psychopaths, you know. But the covert narcissists are the emotional non-intuitive types, the non-intuitive types that are feeler types, like SFJs, ISFJ and ESFJ primarily are the bulk of the covert narcissists. And so they're like Lori Vallow, ESFJ Lori Vallow, ESFJ Bunny, ISFJ Jelly Roll. Those ones, um, they're the ones that he's talking about that like act like empaths, when they're just covert narcissists, but there actually are real empaths, and they're the intuitive types that are not INTJ and ENTJ. So, and those are the types that turn into borderlines when they're unwell or when they're provoked by all the narcissists in society or surrounded by narcissists in society projecting badness on them, so Sam Backman says it's a narcissistic injury to be shown where he's wrong or whatever, and insights he missed or whatever. So this is me dealing him some narcissistic injuries by telling him where he's wrong, that empaths really do exist, and they are distinguished from covert narcissists. And one way to help distinguish them is by using the MBTI and Jungian cognitive function framework. Because as we see in the in my other videos, which focus more on borderline, like the ENFJ intersection video, borderlines are born gifted in a way that covert narcissists are not. Covert narcissists are feminine personalities, just like the overt borderline or whatever, but they are not born gifted like the borderline. The borderline is born with gifts of intuition and heightened sensitivity and perceptivity and stuff. And so there is actually a difference. So he's right that covert narcissists act like empaths, and it's a total bullshit show and bogus, But he's wrong that that true empaths don't really exist, and that it's a bogus word and whatever, because it actually is the empaths that are those borderlines that he prefers, at their worst. Empaths at their worst are borderlines, so mimicking psychopaths and going to extremes of badness and goodness, So he's really invested in projecting badness on so-called empaths and then projecting badness on borderlines, like talking about like how borderlines are so bad, and that he puts up with them and everything, even though he provokes them, intentionally. And he admits that and explains the process of doing that, of griefing them, So I think that the cluster B designation is part of that process of like making borderlines look as bad as psychopaths and narcissists, by clumping them all together as if borderlines are just as bad, when really borderlines are like the true protagonists in the world, or empaths are the true protagonists in the world, and borderlines are just the most pained empaths. And so, it's really muddying the waters of like true evil, true goodness, true protagonist, true villainy in the world by clumping in borderlines in the cluster B designation, and it lets people like Sam Backman, narcissists, muddy the waters and make borderlines look as evil as psychopaths by clumping them in with cluster B. So I really think that empaths need to define and distinguish themselves, as the intuitive types with empathy that aren't the INTJs and ENTJs, and they need to keep themselves from being mixed up from covert narcissists that will mimic them. And they need to stop letting the waters be muddied as if borderlines, aka empaths that are most pained, are just as bad as narcissists and psychopaths, and should be, classified as just as bad as them, in the cluster B designation. So I think that empaths, aka borderlines, which are empaths at the worst, should distinguish themselves. So that's why I'm making this video, to clarify these issues, that there are actual true empaths in the world, and they are the embodiment of the most good conscientiousness and everything good in the world, which is contrary and polar opposite to the narcissists, which are the personification of the devil and the representation of the most evil in the world, and so they shouldn't be clumped together. And so, he's invested in keeping borderlines, Dr. Sam Vaknin and INTJ, narcissist psychopath, is invested in keeping borderlines looking as bad as psychopaths. And so that's what a lot of his lectures do. They project badness on the borderline, by just, mimicking the process he says that he went through with his mother. He was projecting badness on his own mother. He was born with that narcissistic personality disorder, and like he explains, he has these damage stories just like Klaus Michelson, as if, his bad mother or his dead mother, dismissiveness or spoiling or abuse made him that way, and then he transfers that whole story onto the borderline too, and makes her want to like go through that process again and like remother him, and whatever. And he says like he goes through that process, but he gets to come out on top of the mother, the second time around with a romantic partner. So he's just playing around with the whole thing, projecting badness on borderline figures that are like, other mothers. But he doesn't have the mommy issues that he says he has. He just needs to project badness on the most good things in the world. And the most good things in the world would be, mother, whether or not his own mother was good or not. But mothers symbolically in general, they represent the most good and most virtuous things, and sacred things. So that's what he has to go after. He has to go after the most sacred things. One, a mother in general, no matter how good or bad his mother was, how much, whatever she did to him, he was born having to project badness on the most good things, the most good and sacred things in the world, and so that includes his mother. And so that's why he acts like he has damage from his mother that created his narcissism or whatever, but it's not actually true. He was born from it. The only way that his mother created his narcissism was by choosing his father, because it was genetically inherited. So if it wasn't from her, it was from him, but she didn't create it from abuse. And he just, that him having that story is just what NTJ children do. Before they're even double digits in age, they start projecting their own badness on the most good figures. And the most good figures are usually the mother, And so they are invested in projecting all the badness on the most good figure. So it's the mother, and then when they grow up, it's the borderline, aka the empath, that's most pained, that they're going through that whole process over and over and over again, where they project badness on the most good figure, the empath, which is called the quote-unquote borderline, to make them look bad as the psychopath. So hopefully that clarifies a lot of things about the intuitive population and the presence of empaths, the presence of psychopaths, the presence of so-called borderlines, which are just the most pained empaths, and how narcissists are invested in projecting badness on empaths, and calling them borderlines is just one part of that, and clumping them in with narcissists and psychopaths in the cluster Bs is just one part of that, So empaths need to distinguish themselves from narcissists of the covert and overt variety. The overt variety, like in the NTJ psychopaths, empaths need to differentiate themselves from them. And then empaths need to differentiate themselves from non-intuitive sensor feeler covert narcissists like SFJs, that would mimic empaths, mimic the deepest kind of love and virtue and everything else, So I really want these issues clarified, since so many narcissists are invested in muddying the waters between narcissists and empaths. So I'm adding on to the end of this video to point out an article on ScienceDirect.com from the Journal of Behavior Therapy and Experimental Psychiatry called Psychopathy and Depression, Mutually Exclusive Constructs. And so I want to, again, re-emphasize that when Dr. Sam Vaknin says that narcissists like him are traumatized individuals who were traumatized in childhood and that kept them stunted in childhood or whatever, no, they were not traumatized in childhood or ever. They were never able to experience trauma. Just like they were never able to, as born psychopaths and overt narcissists, as INTJ personalities, they were never able to experience depression because that's mutually exclusive with psychopathy, as this research suggests. And then, the definition of trauma, a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that has a profound emotional impact on a person. So nothing is having a huge emotional impact on them. Nothing is deeply distressing them. They were born not being able to feel depression or deep distress or trauma or emotional distress over anything. Like, so they are individuals that can't experience. These INTJ born antisocial, born overt narcissists were born unable to experience depression, unable to experience deep distress and trauma and emotional shock over anything. So he's just kind of acting like the borderline again, or the empath, by acting like he's a traumatized individual, stealing the role of an empath who would be, the empaths are the ones that are deeply distressed and deeply disturbed and traumatized by, the world that we live in with so many narcissists and stuff. And so him saying that narcissists like him are traumatized individuals, that's him again, role swapping with the empath, acting like he's the traumatized child, like the empaths, and like the borderlines, but he was never able to experience trauma. uh, he always, like he said, got positive emotionality from negative things happening. So if his family were destroyed, or he lost a loved one or something, or anything else that could happen that would traumatize a child, that would have had no impact on him. It would have been not even a blip on the radar inside of him because of his deficit or absence of affective empathy. So he can't feel trauma like individuals who weren't born with psychopathic overt narcissism. So I think it's really important to point out that everything he says about narcissists like him being traumatized as kids and that made them narcissists is all bullshit. And he's just, taking the role of the empath by playing the traumatized victim and child, and, and projecting badness on mother figures, because as a overt narcissist, a personification of the devil, like I said, he needs to project badness on whatever the most symbolically good figures are. So regardless of how good or bad each individual mother is, mothers symbolically are an image of goodness and virtue and love and all that other stuff. And so he goes after mothers, so it's all mothers' faults that narcissists exist. The only way that it's mother's fault that narcissists exist now is if they choose narcissists like him to father their child. So yeah, but the point is that, yeah, he really needs to project badness on mother figures. So that's part of the claiming that he's a traumatized. He needs to project badness on the most good figures, mothers, and any other good figures. So, but mothers especially. Mothers is one of the highest figures to go after. And so saying that all narcissists are like traumatized by their bad mothers, their mothers may very well be horrific, but they were more born that way than made that way by anything that happened to them. Their parenting just like exacerbated or attenuated what was already built in there, inside of them, built into their personality. So again, Sam Backman, the overt narcissist, says that, the narcissist sees the empath as being stupid, by letting themselves be emotionally intruded upon, in their empathic ways or whatever. And so that's why the intuitive empath men need to mimic the narcissist and engage in so much narcissistic abuse to differentiate themselves from that, so that they're not intruded upon the way that the female empaths are intruded upon, and and so they're not associated with the weakness associated with that, or the lack of intelligence associated with that. So that's how the lines get blurred between empaths and narcissists, which should be so polar opposite, but empaths being so much more vulnerable and sensitive, and easily hurt and stuff like that, they are attracted to narcissists for their sense of invulnerability, and they may even idolize or mimic narcissists for their sense of vulnerability to compensate for all that pain and vulnerability and weakness they feel, But the intuitive empath males do that even harder, The intuitive empath males need to differentiate themselves from the empaths more than they need to differentiate themselves from the narcissists, They see associations with the narcissist as associations with strength and intelligence, and they see the associations with the empath as weakness. So that's why, even though an empath that can love and have a conscience should want to differentiate themselves more from the narcissist and the psychopath in the world, they feel like differentiating themselves from the evil in the world makes them identify with weakness more in the world, And so they would rather identify with evil in the world than identify with weakness in the world. And so intuitive empath men, when they have the choice, to show allegiance to the side of empaths, or to embody more narcissistic traits, what they're showing allegiance to is like strength and what they see as intelligence, rather than associating with weakness, Even though it would be more virtuous, it might be more virtuous to associate with the empath, they see that as more weak. And their self-concept needs to dissociate from weakness and anything that could be viewed as, against the highest intelligence, So as intelligent as empaths can be, it can seem like it's not so intelligent to be so open and vulnerable and empathic, and so that's what intuitive empath men really want to differentiate themselves from in their self-concept. They want to see themselves as smarter and too intelligent to be so open to emotional intrusion and stuff, like the overt empath woman is, vulnerable to emotional intrusion. So even though the intuitive empath men are vulnerable to emotional intrusion, they want to keep that covert and under wraps. And so they will differentiate themselves more from the empath to preserve their self-concept of strength and intelligence than they will try to differentiate themselves from the narcissist, because it's not as important to them to identify as against evil. It's more important to them to identify as against weakness. So the points I'm trying to make here are deadly important, and I'm kind of repeating them in different ways to make sure that I'm getting the point clearly across, okay? So intuitive men and women who are INTJ or ENTJ are automatically overt narcissists, psychopaths, and these are not the intuitive empaths. They never will be, But the other intuitive types, like I said, the INFJ, the ENFJ, the INFP, the ENFP, the INTP, the ENTP, these are all intuitive empathic types. And the women are overt. So intuitive empath women are overt empaths, where they're empaths, It's obvious. Intuitive empath men are covert empaths. It's less obvious, So the covert empath men, when push comes to shove, when they have to choose one side or the other, they identify more with the narcissist than with the overt empaths. since they see the overt empaths as associated with weakness, vulnerability, and even stupidity. And they see the narcissist as stronger and smarter. And so identifying with the narcissist makes them identify with a figure that's stronger and smarter. So that's why a lot of most intuitive empathic men, the INFJ, ENFJ, INFP, ENFP, INTP, ENTP men will be kind of covert about how they're empaths. They'll be trying to, have an air of masculinity or whatever, or strength, whatever. They're not going to be like waving their empath flag in a lot of ways like the overt empath women wave their empath flag, They don't want to be identified as empaths. The male intuitive empaths don't want to be overtly identified as empaths as like the overt empath women do. And that's because of what Sam Vaknin says about how the narcissist views the empath as weak and even stupid by being so open to emotional intrusion and all of that other stuff. And so the covert empath men, they want to identify with the stronger, smarter associate figure. And so that's why they more often identify with the narcissist and engage in narcissistic abuse and mimic narcissists to make them feel stronger and smarter. To make themselves feel like they're more in allegiance with strength and intelligence than in allegiance with like weakness. So just like in the ENFJ intersection video where I read through the entire article about the unexpected gifts inside borderline personality, I think it's important to read through that article for this video too. Just like it was important to go over that article about, psychopathy and depression being mutually exclusive, in this video, to make the example about, overt narcissists and psychopaths like Sam Vaknin. But this article is very important for the case that I'm trying to make about how it's the intuitives with empathy who are gifted that end up being borderlines, unlike the non-intuitive sensor, the SF types, the sensor feeler types, the emotional types that are not intuitive that end up turning into covert narcissists. So it's very important to distinguish intuitive empaths that may turn into borderlines at their worst from the non-intuitive covert narcissists, like the SFJ covert narcissists. So I want to read through this article. So this is why I never give the sensors, the non-intuitive sensors, the borderline diagnosis. And this is why they're not empaths, since the empaths are the borderlines. So the unexpected gifts inside borderline personality. Why do I feel and see so much? If it's a gift, why do I suffer so much? It's increasingly being recognized that many individuals who receive the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder are highly intuitive and perceptive. What was previously thought of as a genetic vulnerability may reflect an innate talent. People who were born emotionally intense, sensitive, and gifted with heightened perceptivity are like powerful sports cars. It's as if they have a potent engine that requires a special fuel and a special kind of care. In the right condition and with the right keeping, they can be one of the most high-performing machines in the world and win many races. The problem, however, is they may not have been taught how to run this powerful machine. It's like having a Ferrari with bicycle brakes, and these brakes are just not strong enough to control such a powerful engine. Many emotionally intense people are diagnosed or misdiagnosed with various mental disorders throughout their lives, including personality disorders such as BPD. While these conditions are real and extremely painful, we should not immediately assume that they're signs of a defect. It is increasingly being recognized that many individuals who receive the diagnosis of BPD, borderline personality, are endowed with heightened sensitivity and perceptivity, and what was previously thought of as a genetic vulnerability may be a form of giftedness. Drawing on psychological research and theories, we see that many people who struggle with BPD do so as a result of two combining factors: their innate intuitive talents and specific developmental requirements that go along with them, and a childhood environment that fails to meet their emotional needs. What does it mean to be hyper-empathic? BPD is also known as emotional dysregulation disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder. Despite being referred to as a personality disorder, it's not a character flaw, but it's understood as a limitation in a person's capacity to regulate emotions. This means the person with BPD often experiences feelings as rapidly changing or spiraling out of control, alongside impulsive self-soothing behaviors and a chronic sense of internal hollowness. Although the link between borderline and empathy remains controversial, many people with borderline identify with traits of being an empath or being hyper-empathic. Empathy is broadly defined as the way to react to one another, and it explains how we conduct ourselves in this world. An empath is extremely sensitive to the emotions and energy of other people, animals, and places. Although the term empath has not been used very much within academia, psychologists have extensively studied what it is like to have high empathy, and they have found the following phenomenon. Individual differences in empathy level affect the way that people recognize facial expressions and react to social cues. People with high empathy are better at recognizing emotions in others. However, they also have a bias towards negative emotional expressions, meaning they're more sensitive and alert to negative feelings in others. Perhaps due to these propensities, they are more likely to experience quote-unquote empathic distress. Interestingly, it was found that women with high empathy are better than their male counterparts at noticing and recognizing sadness. Excessive empathy and intense sharing of others' negative emotions is linked to emotional disorders. Their empathic distress is often framed as compassion fatigue or burnout. The borderline empathy paradox. It's long been recognized that individuals with borderline seem to possess an uncanny sensitivity to other people's subconscious mental content, thoughts, feelings, and even physical sensations. They also seem to have a talent for involving and influencing others. In the first study that explicitly investigates this observation, Frank and Hoffman found that individuals with BPD showed a heightened sensitivity to nonverbal cues when compared with people without BPD. This finding has been validated through other follow-up research. A well-known study, for instance, compared the way people with borderline react to photographs of people's eyes to those without borderline. The researchers found that the borderline group was more able to accurately guess what emotions those eyes expressed, which showed their enhanced sensitivity to the mental states of others. At their best, these highly intuitive individuals' abilities would constitute what giftedness psychologists call personal intelligence. This kind of giftedness consists of two components: interpersonal intelligence, the capacity to understand the intentions, motivations, and desires of other people, and intrapersonal intelligence, the capacity to understand oneself, to appreciate one's feelings, fears, and motivations. Despite their enhanced empathic ability, many people with BPD have difficulties navigating social and interpersonal situations. Without the ability to regulate their emotions and manage attachment relationships, their hypersensitivity may end up showing up as emotional storms and mood swings, being easily triggered by stressful situations, and a constant fear of abandonment and rejection. This phenomenon is known as the borderline empathy paradox. Why do I feel and see so much? Child psychologists have found that there's a subset of children who have heightened sensitivity to the social world, whose development and emotional outcomes are critically dependent upon their early childhood conditions. In most cases, serious difficulties in emotional regulation, or borderline, is a result of two combining factors. 1. Being born with heightened sensitivity and gifted with perceptivity, aka being born intuitive. 2. A deficient or various childhood environment that fails to meet these children's emotional needs. If it's a gift, why do I suffer so much? Under favorable, quote-unquote, good enough circumstances, a child who is born with a gift in perceptivity would not grow up to have serious emotional regulation issues or borderline. However, if the primary caretakers could not attune to their child, or even resented or were threatened by their unusually perceptive child, they may consciously or subconsciously sabotage the child's healthy development. The nature of the psychological abuse may differ, but it always includes an assault of the child's perceptions and the development of their autonomy. For gifted children, ongoing negative feedback towards their intuitive perceptions is particularly damaging. So this is really important. Again, I'm done reading that article, and it's really important because it helps us figure out how it's only the intuitives that end up being borderline, because they're the only ones that were born with this intuitive sensitivity and perceptivity. It overlaps a lot with the highly sensitive person population, minority population that Sam Vaknin was talking about. The author of this article, Amy Lowe, she has a website called Eggshell Therapy, and on that there are profiles for the INFP and INFJ personalities as some of the most likely types to embody these traits of like being an empath, hyper empathic, being highly sensitive, and highly intuitive, gifted with intuitive perceptivity. And, ENFJ and ENFP are basically built the exact same as INFP and INFJ in so many ways, with slight differences. And then, so that also includes them, even though they're not listed on that website. And then, like I said, NTPs should also be added to the list of intuitive empaths, the hyper empathic individuals, even though they try to be more covert about it, because they don't see it as like masculine enough, and they would rather identify as like rationals, So, as part of their self-concept, no matter the fact that they surely are empaths. So the Eggshell Therapy website goes along with this, talking about, it's the intuitive types that have empathy, that are empathic, that have intensity, high sensitivity, high intuitive perceptivity, etc. And that precludes all the non-intuitive sensors from this borderline diagnosis, And so that's how we know that people like ESFJ Lori Vallow or ISFJ Jelly Roll and ESFJ Bunny, even though they try to act like these big-hearted empaths or whatever, those ones are the covert narcissists mimicking empaths. They could never be the true empaths that would be like borderlines, You see videos that Jelly Roll and Bunny make and you think, are they borderlines, like romanticizing suicide, But no, they're just mimicking the empaths, which turn into the borderlines at their worst, And so if it's a non-intuitive person, a non-intuitive feeler personality like the SFJs that are acting like empaths, like mimicking empaths and borderlines or whatever, then you know that those are the covert narcissists. It's the SFJs, whether they're male or females, that are the bulk of the covert narcissists, and they mimic empaths, So real intuitive empaths need to differentiate themselves from the masses of covert narcissists who act like empaths and mimic empaths.
The narcissist acts as a mother, as a surrogate mother to his intimate partner. What does a narcissist offer you in the love bombing and grooming phase? The narcissist is offering you unconditional love. He's saying, I'm going to love you for who you are. I'm going to love you unconditionally. That's a maternal message. He's acting as your mother, or as your mother should have acted. He's acting as the good enough mother, the Winnicottian good enough mother. So this is his offer. He says, I'm offering you a trade. It's a Faustian deal. I will love you the way a mother does. But in return, you will suspend your being. That's a deal. And many women take it. And they take it because who could resist a maternal love? Who could resist a second chance to be loved properly? And who could resist falling in love with herself via the mirroring process? Yeah. So it's an irresistible deal. You can't say no to it, And very few do. Very few say no. And then you're trapped. You're trapped because the narcissist reverts from a good enough mother to a sadistic, withholding, frustrating mother. And here we have the work of the likes of Guntrip, who went in depth into these issues of frustrating and withholding mothers. But not only Guntrip, of course, but others. Fairbairn's work is stunning work in this area. And Winnicott himself. So the narcissist reverts from a perfectly good enough mother to a withholding, sadistic, frustrating mother, the rejecting object, as it's called. It's becoming a rejecting object. So, and you're thrown off balance. You're thrown off balance, but you're already addicted to your own idealized image in the narcissist gaze. The narcissist made you fall in love with your idealized self, with your, in Freudian terms, with your ego ideal. The narcissist made it possible for you to be loved again, and this time as the reification of your ego ideal. Who can resist this? And so you are mourning, you're cast into mourning. There's a prolonged grief reaction, prolonged grief disorder, because you're mourning not the narcissist, but you're mourning yourself. You're mourning yourself. You had died. You had died, and you had died twice. As a daughter to a loving mother, the narcissist, and you had died as an idealized image of yourself. That's very tough. It's dual mourning. At some point, the narcissist offers you a second Faustian deal. You remember there was a first Faustian deal and then there's a second. He says, listen, I can't love you anymore unconditionally. I'm reneging, something narcissists typically do. I'm reneging. I'm becoming now a sadistic, withholding, frustrating mother. But there's a way out. There's a way out. I can still give you access to my hall of mirrors where you can see yourself as an idealized image. You like that? No, it's a drug. So here's my conditions as a pusher. You're going to love me. You're going to love me as a mother. I loved you as a mother. Now I can't anymore. You want access to the drug? You're going to love me as a mother now. And you're going to love me the same way, unconditionally. But because I'm hypervigilant and I'm a bit paranoid, I don't trust you to love me unconditionally. So I'm going to test you. I'm going to abuse you. I'm going to push your buttons. I'm going to make sure that you really love me unconditionally, never mind what I do to you. And this, of course, provokes narcissistic abuse. So it's a two-phase interaction. He is the mother, and you're the child, and you fall in love with yourself, with your idealized self. And then you are the mother, and he is the child. But now he's testing you to see if you're really a mother or just faking it because you need the drug. So how to test? He abuses you. And if you survive the abuse, and if you're still there, and if you still love him, you are a good enough mother.
Okay, so the last clip that I showed with Sam Vaknin talking about how narcissists mirror you in the love bombing and grooming phase and make you kind of fall in love with a version of yourself during that mirroring process. And also he says that during the love bombing and grooming phase, they offer you unconditional love like a mother. And so I think that is a really profound and powerful excerpt and clip that I find is very true in my experience. I've experienced this with INTJs and ENTJs, which are born overt narcissists, over and over and over again. I've experienced this. And then surprisingly, when I decided to only go with empath men instead of narcissists, I found that INFP men, INFJ men, ENFP men, ENFJ men, INTP men, and ENTP men similarly do the exact same thing. Empath men in our culture, where everyone is peer pressured to pursue hits of the drug called narcissistic supply as narcissist wannabes, empath men are peer pressured into acting like narcissist wannabes. So they see themselves as more, strong if they identify with the narcissist and engage in narcissistic abuse. So empath men, we not only have to deal with this whole mirroring and mothering process with narcissists, but we're actually dealing with it from empath men. And empath men are even better at doing it, at mothering you, because they actually have that empathy, to make you really feel like it's really true. Unlike the overt narcissists, where, as much as they try, it's still lacking some kind of quality convincing quality of emotionality, you know. So the empath men who are engaging in this narcissistic abuse, they do it much more effectively. You know, they can pull on your heartstrings much more effectively than the narcissist, you know, and it hurts much more. So you have to be on guard from narcissists doing this, making you fall in love with yourself through a mirroring process and hooking you with unconditional mother love, just to renege it and frustrate you and provoke you into reactive abuse. And unfortunately, we have to be on guard for this with empath men too, because empath men have been peer pressured to mimic narcissists and be narcissist wannabes. So empath men are also doing this mirroring and unconditional mothering thing during love bombing and grooming. So INFP, INFJ, ENFP, ENFJ, INTP, ENTP men also do this, just like the INTJ and ENTJ overt narcissists. And this is what makes people confused on the internet. Like, can an empath be a narcissist, or can a narcissist be an empath? Whatever. Can there be two in one? They're all mutually exclusive. But the empath men especially are peer pressured to mimic narcissists and be narcissist wannabes. So we have to be on guard for this mirroring and mothering love bombing process with all intuitive neurodivergent men, whether they're narcissists or whether they're empaths who are being wannabe narcissists. So this is all we have to look forward to with the majority of intuitive neurodiverse men, is that they're either narcissists, narcissistically abusing us with this love bombing, mothering, mirroring process, or they're empaths who are wannabe narcissists doing the exact same thing. So that all intuitive neurodiverse men should be ashamed, but especially the ones who are not born overt narcissists, like INTJ and ENTJ, you know, like Sam Backman, that can't really know better, you know, but because they can't feel it with affective empathy. So, but the INFJ, ENFJ, INFP, ENFP, INTP, ENTP, they can feel it with affective empathy. So they should be ashamed that they're engaging in this mirroring, mothering process during love bombing and grooming, just like the narcissist. They need to show loyalty to empaths and stop being narcissist wannabes.